And for those who are with us here, good afternoon. Thank you. I will be introducing the speaker of today, Dr. Ben Nyanchoga, who was once my student and who has been a committed scholar in the field of archaeology. The topic that he is dealing with today, that is archaeology, Pastoral-Neolithic. The topic that he will be dealing with today, which is environmental archaeology. Environmental archaeology, which deals with the archaeology, place, space, and its impact on resource utilization by Neolithic communities of Central Rift Valley in Kenya. That particular topic is within the area of environmental archaeology. And we know that archaeology without environment cannot operate because the populations of the past operated within an environmental context. And we also know that the environment had a key impact on most of their adaptive characteristics. We know about, for example, the Neolithic was about grasslands and was about the availability of the right environment. And we also know that pastoral aspect of it was about grasslands. We also know that the transformation of the environment was key, especially the places where we have archaeological heritage, are actually areas where environment played a key role also. What we know is that environment has never been a determinant for human activities, but human activities have impacted on the environment through time. And this is why this kind of topic, especially resource utilization of Pastoral-Neolithic community, is related to the environment of the Pastoral-Neolithic peoples. Today you see environment in a different eye, in that we talk about anthropogenic forcing, whereby the environment is constantly impacted by what we do. And we know that what Ben is dealing with is about interaction of those communities and the resources that they used. There are various aspects of resource utilization, and Ben will be talking about them. And he will also be talking about evidence of Neolithic settlement or Neolithic resource utilization. And that evidence is about the environmental resources, the resources that were made available by the environment within which communities settled. Neolithic itself is about availability of materials for domestication. It is about whether you have the resources for domestication that you can domesticate. And of course, that was the primary determinant of whether animals and plants would be domesticated. Today, Ben will talk about a key issue about space and its impaction, which is the environment, and also the interaction between communities. With those few remarks, I wish to invite Ben to present his paper. Thank you.
Okay. So, thank you very much, Professor Ome, my teacher for many years and the supervisor. I am delighted to be here this afternoon for the second time. I was here last year to give a presentation, this time on a topic titled Archaeology of Place, space use and its impact on resource utilization by pastoral-Neolithic communities on the Central Rift Valley of Kenya. Well, I want to say that this is an area of study that is interesting, and I am not the first person to delve into this area of study. Quite a number of scholars have done research on Pastoral-Neolithic, and especially in the Central Rift Valley of Kenya. But mine this afternoon, and for a few years that I've gathered data, is just to enrich whatever other scholars have done. I start my presentation this afternoon by first and foremost saying that, the concept of place in archaeology, I'm sorry, I don't know, there is an echo. The concept of place in archaeology is borrowed. I have borrowed this from an eminent scholar by the name Lewis Pinford, 1981, who clearly puts it out that archaeologists need to understand the organization of past cultures. And these past cultures begin at a localized point. And this localized point is actually what we call a place here. But this place is not just another place, but an archaeological place. And from this localized point, then activities of people in the past radiate out. Once they radiate out, they then engage in activities that create spaces. And these spaces are of importance to archaeologists who study spatial activities, especially in the past. I would like to say this, that indeed, for others, archaeologists and historians as well, and the serious researchers, I would like to say that the most exciting moment for an archaeologist is when studying materials in the context of space and time. This is basically what differentiates or distinguishes a scientist or an archaeologist who is basically a scientist from any other person who is interested in materials of the past that we as archaeologists, we refer to as pseudo-archaeologists. So through the study of spaces, we do understand how, materials of the past and archaeological sites helped to divine sites and helped to bring out the concept of settlement patterns. So the concept of space in archaeology indeed has caught the attention of scholars who are interested in spatial attributes of sites. However, it is indeed not easy. It is difficult to estimate with precision the amount of space that prehistoric people may have actually needed in the past. But there is a general understanding that prehistoric people exploited more of horizontal space than actually vertical space. So evidence of horizontal space comes into the study so easily than one who is delving into the study of vertical space, unless your study is focusing on such features as burials and cave sites. But if you are interested in settlement patterns and how features related to each other on a spatial scale, then you will probably understand more of the horizontal space that was exploited by prehistoric communities. As it were, space in prehistoric societies or settlements actually defined what we call site patterning. It is through space that we understand site patterning. The amount of space, of course, required by prehistoric communities, and I'm not talking about Pastoral-Neolithic communities at this moment, because I'm dealing with the introduction, depended on the nature of activities that people were involved in. Much of the time, people were involved in such activities like exploitation of resources from the environment, were involved in activities that were economic based. And these economic based activities led to, the patterning of sites in a manner which clearly explains how these relationships worked out. Spatial and the spatial relationships are often a fundamental way of doing archaeology. One cannot run away from that. It's a fundamental way of doing archaeology. And the space used in archaeology is also about mobility, is about movement, which is indeed a key factor. It is a key factor in terms of, archaeological and even anthropological inquiry. Space use in archaeology is also about stories. And what are these stories? These are stories about, daily activities, such as hunting. It is stories about gathering. It is stories about manufacture of tools, port in camps, and what we call factory sites. In archaeology, where tools are, flaked, we normally call these factory sites. But flaking of tools or manufacture of tools could have, happened within campsites or within factory sites. And generally, and more importantly, exploitation of other environmental resources. The usage of the word story may be simplistic, but these stories are important. They are important because the data that comes out of these stories comes to us in form of qualitative and quantitative forms. And in any research, when you go out there, you are looking for data. And that data can come to you in a descriptive manner or in quantitative forms. One thing, again, that comes out in space use in archaeology, and this probably is a new thing, is that space in archaeology is also about absences and presences. And this concept is brought out by one scholar by the name Lowenborg, 2018, who clearly indicates that, archaeological formation processes can hinder us from asking certain questions. That there is something in archaeology, especially in terms of space analysis, that we call empty spaces. Empty spaces are also as important as those spaces which have archaeological information, because these empty spaces may have also influenced human settlement in one way or the other. So it is good, and it makes academic sense for scientists also within a landscape setup to describe these empty spaces. So space in archaeology is also about absences and presences. In fact, Lowenborg, 2018, states that the absence of evidence is not evidence to absence. And therefore, empty spaces need to be interpreted and described. As I said earlier, these are spaces which also may have hindered human activities, and they are of importance to archaeologists as well. One thing that again comes out, especially with the coming of new archaeology in the 1960s and beyond, and especially after the post-war period, is on how to represent space in archaeology. How is space in archaeology represented? That there are challenges that come along with the representation of these spaces. And when I talk about spaces here, we are in agreement that these are units within the landscape where we had prehistoric human activities take place. So when we talk of a space, let us not look at it as a vacuum. This is a place that comes, or a space that comes with activities. But then, how do we represent this space? It poses challenges. Representation of space is one fundamental way of structuring and understanding what we call spatial archaeology. It clearly says that in archaeology, it is through the process of engaging with evidence. It is through the process of engaging with evidence that we conceive what we call representation of space. If we don't have evidence, then we cannot be able to conceive space. Space is about evidence, and evidence gives us that guidance to understanding that archaeological space. Now, this is usually brought forth and determined by the use of what we can call high resolution techniques. And these high resolution techniques, which take place in a field work scenario, includes the usage of high resolution techniques like the GIS, GPR. GPR means ground penetrating radar. GPS is global positioning system, remote sensing, archaeological geophysics, excavation, the use of such instruments at the total station, and of course, excavation, among other techniques. So all these techniques brought forth within the scenario of doing field research will be able then to bring out this archaeological space that we need at most, I mean. Therefore, a follow-up from this argument is that space and technology are other prime factors that help us in understanding spatial studies. Understanding how social boundaries are expressed via material culture is indeed very significant in doing archaeology. So technology will help us to exploit that space. Technology will help us to understand that space. And that is what exactly archaeologists do. But I want to finish up with that background information by saying that archaeological, not archaeological, but there is one scholar I would like to quote here that I like reading his works about, David L. Clark. In his book, Analytical Archaeologist, David Clark comes with a chapter titled Archaeology Loses Innocence. Archaeology loses innocence in this manner. It loses innocence at the point in which it tries to rediscover itself. How does archaeology rediscover itself? It is running away from what pseudo-archaeologists do. It is running away from what antiquarians used to do and embracing technological advancements in understanding archaeological phenomena. It is a point at which, archaeology becomes what we call a self-conscious discipline with the capacity to over space. And I'll keep on using this word space for critical thinking. It offers space for presenting opportunities and understanding competing theories and, of course, models and concepts. As a result of that, a new front is available in the archaeological arena with huge methodological approaches, which of course now extends our archaeological senses by detecting more previously unknown information, more previously unknown data attributes. This archaeological reasoning that comes out with, the analysis of David Clark tells us one thing, that archaeological reasoning then exposes basic importance of what we call archaeological logic. Basic importance of archaeological logic within the broader discipline of archaeological philosophy and of course, theory. So in terms of background information, that is what space in archaeology offers. But now turning into the substance of this presentation this afternoon, I would like to move straight to the study areas. And the study area is the Central Rift Valley of Kenya. I know many archaeologists know about this place, but even those who don't know where the Central Rift Valley is, this afternoon you have an opportunity through some schematic, illustrations here to clearly understand where this part lies. If you look at the map that is the drawing that is here on the screen, I'm sorry that it is cut off a little bit. This is where we have the Central Rift. The Central Rift, of course, extends all the way from the Naivasha basin through the Elementaita basin and all the way to the Nakuru basin. So sometimes this region is described in different terminologies. There are others who like to call it Naivasha, Nakuru Elementaita basin. The most important features about this place is that the Central Rift is sandwiched between two major landmarks. On the east, we have the Mau Escarpment. And on the west, we have the Aberdare Ranges. So that is where the Central Rift lies. But I want to say this, that the Central Rift Valley of Kenya is, of course, a basin that is sandwiched between the two landmarks. And it has rich human and environmental history. In fact, which dates back to the Pleistocene period. The Pleistocene period dates to about 2.7 million years ago to about 11,700 years ago. And the Pleistocene, if you go to the climatic understanding of the Pleistocene period, you know that this is a period that was coupled with the environmental and climatic changes, which was also associated with the Ice Age. There were times when it was so wet and cold, and of course, there is a time when it was warm, what we call glacial and interglacial periods. But I don't want to go deeper into that. I just want to say that studies on this side has been done extensively by, I think there is another figure, just a minute, but I wanted it projected. Just a moment. I'm sorry, I'm taking your time, but there's a figure I would like to put on forward so that it is able to be reflected well. Maybe I can use this. I'll guide you to where that figure is. So before we go to that figure, I think that's the next one. I would like to say that this region has attracted extensive studies of course, by various scholars. And these scholars include such persons as John Richard Fenn Power, who is the pioneer archaeologist of the region, who started Pastoral-Neolithic. Others, including even Stanley Ambrose. We have had people like Richard and Richardson. We have had Nicholson. We have had people even locally like Karega Munene, in going all the way to Professor Smiu and the rest, including myself and other colleagues of mine who are here. So these are regions which has attracted a lot of archaeological research. So my coming in is basically to enrich the studies that have been done here before, because there are new insights which keep on coming up as the study continues. So the Central Rift forms an archaeological basin. This region forms an archaeological basin that gives a lot of evidence in line with the Pastoral-Neolithic activities. The study indicates that there was over-reliance on the use of domestic stock. And of course, you know, the remains of domestic stock in some of these sites have been found together with those of wild animals. And a number of sites which, you know, gives this evidence includes such sites as the Irax Hill, the Crescent Island, Gambo's Cave, and of course, even in Choro River Cave. But for the purpose of this study, I will not, you know, go into all the sites because we have quite a number of sites, including even in Derit site, Longest Rift, and so forth. But I'll restrict myself because the study is basically on space use to two key sites. The others, I just mentioned them. And these two key sites are Irax Hill and of course, the Crescent Island. So I would like you to go to plate 1. I place it down there. If you look at what you just go down, there is plate 1. There's something I want to illustrate there. So plate 1. So this is the Irax Hill. For those of you who have been there before, those who haven't been there, the Irax Hill is situated on a road, actually adjacent to the roadside, through Nairobi, you know, main highway. And what we are seeing here at the top here is the summit of the hill. So Irax Hill site presents an array of other, you know, smaller sites within it, which paint a picture to what our interest is this afternoon. The interest is space needs and the resource exploitation. The summit of that hill towers behind the sites, and through research, that site may have been used as a watching spot against raiders. And also, studies have shown that it may have been used as a resting place where people viewed the surrounding plains to the east and, of course, west of the hill, and the Nakuru, which is to the south. So in terms of understanding space needs here, by prehistoric pastoral groups, I've made reference to noticeable, you know, features, a few of the features. The most, you know, conspicuous of these features are what we call the occupational floors. And I would like you to go to figure figure 3 together with the plate 2. Okay, just roll out here, then I'll perhaps speak about something. Okay, what we are seeing on the screen are actually locational, data of the key sites within the Irax Hill, where we have the summit of the hill, the Neolithic cemetery, occupational floor number 1, occupational floor number 2, and the GIS readings are provided at the end there. But I would like you, in terms of understanding what we are talking about here, to go to plate, I think it's plate 2, where we have the occupational floors. Before I get back, just go to the next plate. No, just go down. Go down. No, not that one. There is another one. There is another one there. There's another photo. I think it's up. Yeah, this one. This is what we call the occupational floors. And the study that I did a few years back was such a study that was interested especially in the usage of space in this specific site. So if you look at this site, which I've already given the GIS readings, you can notice that there are 2 features here that we call occupational floors. And these may have been used by Pastoral-Neolithic communities as sheltering places. Others say they could have been used as ceremonial places. But the most important thing in this study is to understand the space needs of these features, which of course I will describe as we move on. So I want to say this, that different structures within a given spatial location may have had a social connection. For example, barriers may be located close to the units of residence or shelter, although these also differs, across communities and across societies. The social implication, usually, of this is that barriers and even features that are close to each other, like the ones which are displayed here, may have belonged to close family members. Hence, the connectivity between these different features. But measurements which have been taken here show close proximity. They show close proximity between these features, which implies that the occupants may have been actually close family members or members of the same family. Behind the features, which of course I did not capture in my photo, we have what we call, a Neolithic cemetery. And it's not located far away from these features, which means that this Neolithic cemetery was actually used by the occupants of these occupational floors. So the various closeness to the occupational floors suggests that it had some social connection with the people. So the Neolithic patio, which is not captured in this photo, is within the same spatial location as the occupational units. But there is a figure, figure number 5, I would like you to project there, which now tells us more about, space dimensions. Number 5, figure 5 is somewhere down, I think after this. Yeah, this one here. This is an illustration of the two occupational flaws that are done when I did this research. And my interest here was actually doing measurements and getting the actual distances between these two features. And the distance of the two occupational flaws, their dimensions, their size, from this Neolithic barrier, which is now clearly shown there. So these two occupational flaws, one is larger than the other one. If we look at the readings there in terms of dimensions, the smaller one measures around 2.5 meters in diameter, and then the other one measures 3 meters in diameter. And the openings or the entrance to these features face different directions. There is a reason why these measurements were done, and we'll look at it when I'm doing my discussion on the same. So the measurements are there. The distance between one feature and the other one, the bigger one, the smaller one, is about 5.1 meters. So I want to say this, that occupational flaw A that we are seeing there is, of course, smaller than occupational flaw P. Its diameter is approximately 2.5 meters, while the bigger one measures about 3 meters. Both have entrances. Both have entrances, of course. The smaller one measures about 0.3 meters, and then the bigger one measures around 0.1 meters. This is actually measurements that were done on the ground during research. So what are we saying here? In terms of understanding spatial needs or spatial characteristics of these features, this study is aligned with what two scholars did in Aboriginal Australia. We have a scholar by the name Galget and Hayden, who studied the Aboriginal communities of Australia, and their article is titled Site Structure, Kinship, and Sharing. Site structure, kinship, and sharing. This was the finding. The two scholars concluded that for all households, because we want to assume that these are households, for all households related to primary genealogical relationships, there is a high likelihood that they would be closely spaced. They also indicate that primary kinship ties have more of an impact. They have more of an impact on socio-economic relationships, especially on structures and sites. So this is a study that was done at the IRAX Hill and also contextualized with what Galget and Hayden did among the Aboriginal communities of Australia. Another site that the research also focused on was the Crescent Island site. So the Crescent Island sites are open air sites, and they are located adjacent to Lake Naivasha. The GIS readings give us the actual location of these sites. We have the survey pecon there. We have trench number 1 that was excavated, and the trench number 2. And both of these trenches are backfilled. Those of us who do archaeology understand what backfilling means. You excavate and then you return the soil to cover the trenches. But there is evidence. When you go to the ground, you are able to see the evidence that there was excavation here. So these are the GIS readings of the actual location of the Crescent Island sites. But our technician can still navigate and show us now a photo, which will show us where, the crescent island sites are. There's a photo there, or a plate, we call it a plate in archaeology, whereby there's an arrow and a survey beacon. I don't know whether it's downwards or upward there. Okay, this is where the crescent island sites here had an opportunity to go all the way up to this place. And if you look at the plate here, you may not be able to notice the sites from here. But if you are on the actual ground, you will be able to see the two trenches. It is just adjacent to Lake Nakuru. I mean Lake Naivasha, I'm sorry. So you have to pass through the southern end in order to access this site. But what is the importance of this site? We understand that, of course, even through our analysis as archaeologists, that though not very clearly identifiable, these sites are represented by, surface scatter of obsidian flakes and backfilled trenches. This open site may have been preferred by Pastoral-Neolithic societies because it was closer to the lake. And there is still a belief through studies, an argument that has been made by other scholars that during the time of its occupation, this site may have been actually surrounded by water. Or even at some point, it may have been submerged. But as of today, it is very, very conspicuous. This open site, of course, as we have said, it was preferred because it was close to the source of water. The GIS readings are given there. And there are two main crescent island sites, both of them located on raised ground, above the shoreline. One of the sites is 27 meters from the margin, while the other is 34 meters. These sites, I think I've just mentioned this, they are marked by backfilled trenches and a scatter of obsidian flakes. Obsidian is a dark volcanic rock. Sometimes we call it glass, volcanic glass, that was indeed preferred by prehistoric communities because it produced very sharp flakes that were needed in various tasks. So the high percentage of flakes at the sites indicate that microliths are the plates, the small size plates, were indeed extensively used. And then it doubles as a site that may have been a camping site and also a factory site. By, of course, the extensive, evidence of obsidian flakes. So the distance of the sites from the shoreline, because we are looking at space, suggests that their location was chosen with the utmost care, especially for fear of attacks from aquatic animals like crocodiles and hippos, which are so common, of course, in this lake. Now, if you navigate, you go to figure 7. There's an illustration that I've given there. Figure 7. I hope I will have time because I want to move to the conclusion. If we move to figure 7, this is just a schematic illustration of the, not this one, the figure 7, the one you had just, yeah, this one here. These are measurements that were done on the two sites. You can see where the noting is. We have Crescent Island site number 1 and 2, and the distance from the shoreline. This distance has an archaeological implication, especially in terms of use of space. So, as I conclude on this Crescent Island, before I move to the discussion of this, it is actually also difficult to understand the amount of space that was needed, especially for communities that settled on open sites. because measuring with precision on the amount of space that was needed in a place that is not confined isn't easy. And therefore, the assumption is that these people had more than enough space, to utilize, and they roamed around the landscape. I want you to navigate through, this one I'm moving very fast because I'm taking care of time, through the circular illustrations. The circular illustrations, the first one being, this is the first one. So this is an illustration which comes in line with what in archaeology we call site catchment analysis. That communities, get their resources within certain specific distances. So if you look at the Iraq's Hill as a settlement nucleus, or as the OMPES, communities would have moved to the distances that are shown there. And in each of these concentric lines, I do indicate where key points are. We have Mount Eburu at the outer circle. We have Lake Nakuru about 5 kilometers away. We have River Makaria 6 kilometers away, and pasture lands, surrounding the nucleus of the settlement. So this is what also happens with the other sites like the Crescent Island. Even if you had to move up, if you have to scroll, because I want to do away with the figures. This is what we have done, but I'm going to make a conclusion on all this and sum them together. So this is the other side, of course, Crescent Island, and then the other two will be Gambos Cave and Njoro River Cave. So don't worry about those three. But I want to move to the main discussion now. Then we find out which way to go. As I said earlier, Pastoral-Neolithic studies in East Africa were pioneered by John Richard Fenn Power. But this scholar is so much, credited, especially for his works that he did in the site of Tanzania, in the Serengeti Plains. That's where he did much of his work. But indeed, John Boer, together with other, scholars, archaeologists, pioneer archaeologists who share the same ideas, do indicate that space use in archaeology can be conceptualized at 3 levels. 3 levels. What we call the micro-scale level, semi-micro scale level, and the macro scale level. The micro scale level is space use that is restricted to sites. Just, the interior patterning of sites within a site, within the occupational floors that you saw here. That space need within an occupational floor, it is seen as at the level of microscale. Same microscale is when space is analyzed and studied in the context of one feature as it's located adjacent to other features. For instance, we have the occupational levels, we have them there, they are there practically. You don't have to be an archaeologist to go there. Against the Neolithic barrier, which is a few meters away. Then we have the Neolithic, pit houses that I didn't capture in my study on the other side of the Iraq's Hill, what we call sirikwas in archaeology. So when you study them within that context, how these features are related to the next, That is at the same micro level. Then at the macro level, this is now study of archaeological features within a landscape, the landscape level. And that landscape can extend to the whole of the Central Rift. How does a site like Iraq's Hill relate to Mount Eburu, where obsidian as a source of raw material for the manufacture of tools was sourced? How does the site of Iraq's Hill relate to Lake Nakuru, which may have been a source of water for the prehistoric communities? How does the site of Nderit relate to River Makaria, and so forth? So that comes at the macro level. If you project, there's something I want you to project here. I'm sorry that I have a lot of figures. You know, this is what archaeologists do. Just check figure number 11. I hope it will be able to be seen. Just go, you'll see a lot of drawings there. This is research that I did practically some years back. Just go. You see? No, then just go, I'll be able to, I think, yeah, this one. If you look at this illustration here, this is now understanding space use from a macro perspective. In fact, this is an analysis, a study of the entire Central Rift, or perhaps, you know, the Naivasha-Nakuru Eremitator Basin. This is the Iraq's Hill. I take it as the reference point. And then these are the distances to the key sites where prehistoric communities, Pastoral-Neolithic communities got their resources from. We have Lake Naivasha here, we have the Crescent Highlands, we have the Mau Escarpment, and then we also have Nchoro River, Gambo's Cave, and all that. So when you analyze a region in that manner, vis-a-vis the archaeological sites and how they relate to each other, this is at the macro level. Now, moving away from that, I want to say that in this study, you know, the use of space by Pastoral-Neolithic communities of the Central Rift can then further be understood in the context of what we call site catchment analysis. Site catchment analysis was brought forward, this concept, by one eminent archaeologist by the name Claudio Peter Fins. I think in the year, should be the year 1981 or 1980. No, 1970, I'm sorry. It refers to the analysis of sites in relation to their environmental surroundings. Therefore, in a very plain way of understanding it, it is a model that helps in understanding and answering and testing hypotheses at prehistoric economies. The assumption being that habitation sites, this is the main assumption. The habitation sites will be placed nearer the resource points or resource areas. And when you look at this ideology, this is where the substance of this argument lies. It seems to borrow from a model that was fronted by Alfred Weper, W-E-P-E-R. So much early in history, 1909. It appears that Alfred Weper was actually an industrialist, because this model talks of, you know, economies of scale. And Weber did put it plainly that cost and the distance are a factor when it comes to acquisition of raw materials. That you must look at the distance and the cost. When you go deeper into this model, you actually find that Claudio Peter Fins and Eric Hicks must have borrowed this ideology and brought it to site catchment analysis. But even before that, Weber gave classification of two raw materials that he referred to as ubiquitous raw materials and localized raw materials. Ubiquitous raw materials are those ones which are spread all over the landscape. They are available all over. And therefore, the travel distance is not a factor. The cost is not a factor. Unfortunately, this does not happen in the landscape. And therefore, he did give another classification of raw materials, localized raw materials, which are found at particular locations. And these are the raw materials now which draw the issue, or which brings into focus the issue of distance and the cost. Whichever the case, what mattered most is the value and utility of the resources, and the distance and cost will do not matter at some point. So Fitter, Fins, and Hicks then used the simple cost benefit analysis principles supported by simple ethnographic and historical examples to explain the maximum radius of daily exploitation of resources. The radius means the distance one can travel. In fact, their arguments of these two scholars was this, that for hunting and gathering communities, the maximum distance they would travel on a landscape or a move. When I use the word travel, I don't mean traveling using vehicles. In prehistoric times, people used to walk and roam through the landscape, was 10 kilometers, hunting and gathering. But for labor-intensive activities, like agriculture, farming, it was restricted to only 5 kilometers. This argument and hypothesis was used sometimes back. I'm sorry to say that because as historians, we give actual date. It was sometimes back in the ancient times, not sometimes back, in Palestine and Israel, where its first form application was done, and the students were dispatched to carry out timed walks from a sample of Neolithic sites in Israel and Palestine, taking notes on the topography, soils, vegetation, and other environmental variables. Now, after that study and the outcome of it, Fitter, Fins, and Eric Hicks renamed the technique Site Territorial Analysis, STA, which clearly says that areas habitually used for daily subsistence from given locations will be actually be termed as the OMPES. And therefore, moving from the OMPES, communities would move to a nearer area where they will do their activities within a day, which is called or referred to as a territory or a home range. So these studies expanded, and over time, new models came up, depending on, cost and the distance. And looking at labor-intensive activities and those that were not. Then other models were brought up, like the optimal foraging theory, taking care of, the cost and distance and the energy expended. Because some of these concepts I borrowed from biology and borrowed actually from the way animals behave within a territory. Animals don't want to expend more energy. But brought to human beings, the optimal foraging theory or model, it identifies what we call optimal relationship between costs and benefits. How far do you want to go? Do you unnecessarily want to go far to exploit resources, or you can exploit those resources within a given range? And therefore, going deeper into this, and through studies in various sites, it was established that, for example, volcanic glass, which is obsidian, that was used in the Central Rift, was sourced all the way from Mount Eburu. I don't know whether Mount Eburu is captured here, but it should be somewhere. It may have been a distance, but the value of that resource dictated the fact that they had to travel and move all the way to Mount Eburu. But other studies do suggest that large mammals or large animals are butchered at kill sites to remove wastes and transport the meat to the home range, to the home base. Because it is illogical to carry a whole animal full of waste from far distance areas where it has been killed to the home base. So prehistoric people were also knowledgeable and intelligent. They knew, yes? Okay. So I want to finish by saying this, and it's unfortunate because there was a lot. Now, that 5 minutes, I use it very well. So other, resources in terms of exploitation were looked at from that perspective. But I would like you to project my last figure. I would have talked about it, but since time is over, we'll understand what that means. And this, the last one. The last is a concentric figure. Where now we sum up all our arguments into one illustration. It is this one. I'm sorry, can you, are you able to constrict it a bit so that I use my 2 minutes to finish up what I'm talking about? So if you look at this, I'm sorry, you may not be able to see this. We have various, locations within this model. We have the home base, we have the home range, we have the foraging radius, logistical radius, extended range, and the visiting zone. So the home base is where people reside. Where they get materials with ease is the home range or site territory. The foraging radius is a place where people will go for resources, because I don't want to read what is here. Let me just summarize. And at least spend a night. They have to spend a night there before they come back the following day. The logistical radius is also another area where people will spend more time. They spend more time, even more than a day, to get those resources. And that means that the people who move from the home base must also take care of their subsistence. What are they going to eat there? The extended range, this is an area that is well known to the task groups, to the work parties, to the hunters. But within this area, there is no exploitation of resources unless it is very necessary. It's like you can have knowledge that obsidian is found in a place called Mount Eburu, and when it becomes so necessary, we'll go for it. That's an extended range. So you have knowledge of the place, you have knowledge of the resources there, and then finally, you only exploit those resources when necessity comes in. Finally, the visiting zone. This is a place which is outer. It belongs to relatives. It belongs to other groups. So it's an overlapping territory. And parties from the home base will only come here to exploit these resources at the invitation of the hosts. And therefore, what they'll do, they'll set camps here, because it will require that they'll have to take quite a number of days here. They set camps and exploit resources of the host communities. So once they do that, this is a region where, Aiden talks of a region where marriage can take place, wife sharing, and other resources are exploited. I would have talked more about these things, but let me leave it there. At least you have an idea of what space use is all about in archaeology. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben, for a very comprehensive presentation. Now we know what spaces are. And I think there are many issues that have been covered about space, about the interrelatedness of space with its surrounding environment and resources. I think Ben has also gone into some of the early theories about space utilization by Higgs and Vita Vins. And it is important that he has been able to intermarry those conceptualizations of use of space utilization. I am impressed with the presentation, and we should appreciate Ben for that. Can we clap? Yes. Now, but as I appreciate the many things that Ben has said about the microenvironment, about the macro environment and the relationships, I had one question which had been raised earlier, an issue that arose some time back. And that's about trade. Where is the position of trade in this whole trade, exchange of products? Because I guess as we do today, there is that aspect of the other communities which have exchanging with those who don't, and probably moving of certain precious items that could not be easily accessible within, not within the home range, but what we used to call offsite, outside the site. So that aspect of interrelatedness with the related communities or with the related individuals, one family going to another family and spending time and getting those resources. Ideally, I would have also expected that there is kind of social gathering, otherwise the family would become extinct. There should be an element where there is that socialization element. And probably Ben will tell us about the socialization. The other element is about Hyrax Hill, those bombers, the kraals. I think it was important. You said you are going to leave them out. The cattle, they're actually called cattle bombers. But I think they are part of this matrix, this space, and they are part of the environment. And therefore, I would like him to delve into that area as well, because it may help us to understand from a family perspective, do you need that kind of space for bombers? Would it require probably that there was a community instead of a family, and therefore needed those wider space, because the space is quite extensive? Now, when it comes to Crescent Island, there are two sites. Do they belong to the same grouping, or did you look at them as belonging to different groups? If the latter, how would you distinguish from distances? Because here we are dealing with movement from one side, from the home base to the source of resources. At what point does it become uneconomical? You have mentioned, but for you, given that you have gone to the field, at what point did you conclude that it was becoming uneconomical and therefore no need for people to move further? I think off-site archaeology, which is also the STA and environmental archaeology, about the use of resources within a particular zone or space, requires that we know, requires that for us to have very solid discussion of the home base, we need to also know the distances traveled, which you have done, but we need to know at what point does it become uneconomical to move, which you have also mentioned. But the issue of trade might be important in unlocking all this. What if I said Hyrax Hill was occupied by a large community? Thank you. We'll allow Ben to address those issues. Otherwise, he has dealt with an issue that has been in archaeology for quite some time, has never quite gotten a lot of attention, but Ben has addressed it and looked at other alternative ways of interpreting the same information. I think with that, I will open up this discussion to our audience on the ground, and we'll allow them to ask questions, and Ben can address those issues together with a few questions that I have raised. Otherwise, that was an excellent piece of presentation. Thank you. Question time. We start with the audience here. Yes, Wafula and Tabitha. And then, yes, yes, our friend from literature, yes. Yes, and Dr. Ken Obongi.
Thank you very much, our colleague Ben, for that very informative presentation. You have aroused interest in some of us who may not have been very much interested in issues of space analysis in archaeology. My question may not be directly relevant to your topic, maybe out of scope, but since it's about the Pastoral-Neolithic, I think it's in order. It's also about space. We know that Pastoral-Neolithic is divided into the Savannah Pastoral-Neolithic and the Elementary traditions. And although these two traditions of the Pastoral-Neolithic are partly contemporary, they generally don't share the same spatial distribution, because you find that the Savannah Pastoral-Neolithic sites are mostly found in the northern part of Kenya and the central Rift Valley, where you have been talking about, going south into Tanzania. But you find that the elementary sites are found on the western part of the central Rift Valley you have been talking about, going into western Kenya, Nyanza region, Kisii region, where you come from, my colleague. Now, that being said, there is a place, the Laikipia Plateau, where at the macro level or the intersite level that you have been talking about, you find that both the Savannah Pastoral-Neolithic and the Elementary and tradition sites are found. Is there something, maybe you'd like to comment whether there's something unique about the Laikipia Plateau, given that it's not very far away from the place you have been talking about? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ben, for such a good presentation in our area in archaeology. I have probably like two observations. The first one is that what Ben is talking about is an aspect of what we can call settlement archaeology. In this essence, he was able to bring on board that prehistoric people weren't putting up their settlements or coming up with the habitation areas near resources, for example, water, for them to be able to access this very important resource. But probably I may like to ask this. Are there any adaptive strategies that these prehistoric communities used to living within those environments? Question two, probably I would ask, were there any driving forces that influenced settlement of prehistoric societies in the central Rift Valley? The third question is that when you are looking at the features in the Hyrax Hill, the features being in the aspect of graves. Mwalimu, you mentioned that those graves were put together, implying that they were of people of the same lineage in terms of families, or people who are related. what of such features that were located away from settlement areas or away from where people are occupying? Probably, can we say that probably if they were there, did they imply that people who are evil within the society, people who are probably thugs, went being buried away from where people were occupying or where people were habitating?
Thank you very much, Dr. Nyanchoga, for a well-illustrated and refreshing presentation. I have a chronology of observations. Some of them are questions. One, this presentation sits well with the main theme of this series of seminars, that is bringing history down from the ivory tower. Now, I am just wondering whether you might have established a link between those prehistoric communities that occupied those sites that you have studied with the current communities living in Kenya presently. And I have in mind indigenous communities, sometimes called First Nations. In other places, they are called Aboriginals. Secondly, if it is in the affirmative that we have a link between those prehistoric settlers and the indigenous communities that currently occupy the sites now, how would you then situate your study within the larger rights claiming struggles by indigenous communities to have their rights to their land, their resources addressed? Because we know that the colonialists appropriated, we use appropriation as what I can call a whitewash, but actually they stole land from them. Matters have not been helped by successive post-independence governments. And now multinational corporations have taken over, especially around the site where you are studying, Naivasha, Nakuru, and so on. So communities have been deprived of their land. Would you then perhaps want to expand your study towards a human rights direction where you perhaps give suggestions on how these communities can be compensated? Finally, this is a well-illustrated study, but I noticed something, and this is largely relating to how the figures and pictures you used were named. I noticed that they were just numbered. You are using figure 1, figure 2, figure 3. But in many texts I've studied in social sciences, figures are usually described. For example, if you have a picture, you say, this is a picture illustrating this, or this figure is a concentric circle showing the base in relation to X, Y, Z. Is that style of illustration unique to archaeology? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nyanchoga, for such an eye-opening presentation. Dr. Nyanchoga is very well known as the Secretary General, no, not the Secretary General, the organizing secretary of the University of Nairobi Academic Staff Union. And we know Ben for union activities, but I'm adding into that that you are very well grounded in the work you do as an archaeologist, and that's very good. I have a couple of questions for you. And bear in mind that I'm a historian, fairly illiterate in matters archaeology. Dr. Sachi, you took one from me. And when you were talking, if we were sitting closer to each other, I could have thought you eavesdropped on my notes. And that is the question of, the link between the prehistoric societies that Ben was talking about and the indigenes of some of these areas, the Ogiaks, the Njams, leave alone those of us most recent immigrants to some of these regions. But Dr. Sachi, you articulated it very well. You were asking it for me. Thank you, sir. Now, my first question, now that Dr. Sachi took the other one, is, Ben, I understand your thoughts as, and Professor Waume stated that earlier, that this is some kind of environmental archaeology. And as you spoke, I understood what you were saying as bringing forth the intersections of the past, the present, and the space. But what did not come out very clear to me, and this is what I want you to elaborate, how does an archaeologist come in here in these intersections of the past, present, and space in creating a deeper and probably a more nuanced meaning of human interactions and activities with the environment? And I'm asking this because I'm aware that archaeologists, just like historians, are actually human. And they come to the material that they interpret with interests, threats, and fears. If you comment about that, what's the role of the archaeologists in all this? And probably how could that affect one's objectivity in the interpretation? The second one is, I was just wondering, how do these intersections, or are they able to help us, have some kind of understanding and make meaning of what we now call environmental degradation and the global warming? If you may help us, then these are the issues we are talking about in the world currently that probably will increase the relevance of archaeological knowledge that you are involved in creating. Now, the last one is a very small one, when you were presenting those concentric settlements, from the home base going outwards, you suggested that people will come from the outer zones to their home base. And one of the things they came to enjoy there is something you called wife sharing and other resources. Now, implicit in that, and forgive my English, probably Dr. Sachi is better placed in this interpretation. Implicit in that is that, wives were also resources, to be shared. Now, Dr. Nyanchoga, how does this stand in today's feminist scrutiny? Because I have a feeling that such a phrase tends more to, patriarchal misogyny and objectification of women. Thank you, sir.
We shall have a second round on site, and then we'll go to the internet audience. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for the questions. Some of the questions are difficult, of course. You know, when you are asked a question, you don't know what kind of a question will come your way. Nonetheless, I will try attempt to answer. I want to start by attempting to answer Professor Wame's question. He did ask about socialization and offsite archaeology. And he did ask, okay, let me start with the first one. If we look at the concentric lines that are drawn there, vis-a-vis resource exploitation. And this is something which is understood from a logical position in line with, distance traveled and cost, because you did talk of also exchange and trade. I didn't get enough time, but according to the research that I did on the ground and from library research and looking at the work of Aiden, it comes out clearly that the visiting zone, which is in the outer concentric line, is described as a zone where exchange most likely took place. Because the assumption is that people would have traveled all the way to those visitation zones to procure or a source for resources that they could not get within reach. And therefore, that intelligent guess and assumption is that trade would have taken place there. And of course, socialization, because it is in this outer zone where Aiden says that socialization much, of course, took place with the relatives and the other activities on a social context may have taken place. I may not answer it very well, but with the little knowledge that I have, that would have happened that way. You did ask something about the Hyrax Hill. I know Hyrax Hill is an extensive site, and it must have been inhabited by a large community, most likely a Pastoral-Neolithic community, which may not have been related at family level. The only thing that I didn't do, because of time and all that, is to capture the evidence on the other side of the hill, which includes the Sirikwa hollows, or the pit houses that were used in keeping livestock. And therefore, I want to agree with Professor Waume in the sense that Hyrax Hill may not have been inhabited necessarily by very close family members. It was a place inhabited by a community. And this can also be strengthened more if you read on what we call the community area theory. The community area theory talks so much about communities coming together on a restricted space for various activities. Crescent Island, 2 sites. This one, I was unable really to make a big difference because the sites are even fading in the first place. 2 trenches with similar, findings. And therefore, my assumption was that these sites were related. They were places that were inhabited by, the same people who decided one group of people settle here or do your activities here, while the other group does their activities there. I may not be right, but again, when evidence fades, you may not have much to say, especially because I didn't do excavation. Mine was exploration. How far are the people willing to travel? People will travel far depending on the value of the resources they are looking for, and especially if those resources are not within reach. And for me, my research as I traversed this region, I concluded that communities were able to move all the way from my focal point, the Iraq Hill, all the way to Mount Eburu, because they were sourcing for a more valuable resource, obsidian. Obsidian, this was the main source of obsidian, and they needed this raw material for the manufacture of stone tools. So they would stop traveling far if they were able to get the resources they wanted. But within that restricted area, within that macro scale level, the assumption was that they were able to move. And that was not necessary to move in a day and come back. They would move even several days. I want to also answer Wafura's questions. Okay, Wafura, I will try to answer this. I'm not very sure, but I want to use what we call deductive and inductive reasoning. Savannah Pastoral-Neolithic, Eremantine and Pastoral-Neolithic. Eremantine and Pastoral-Neolithic is also characterized by distinctive, flex, what we call Eremantine plates and all that. But at the point of intersection in the Laikipia Plateau, I want to assume that these were same people, originally exploiting different environments, but again, coming closer to each because, in the landscape, people roam for the purpose of looking for resources. That is the assumption I'll make. It may not be accurate, but I would like to answer it that way. But again, I can see you so that you give me more insights on this. Peter, adaptive strategies used to exploit resources in those environments, yes, of course. The most important thing is technology here. Any prehistoric society had some form of technology, however rudimentary it was, in exploiting environmental resources. In fact, one scholar that I cannot remember with certainty here did say that the technological addition of Pastoral-Neolithic communities was not any different from that of hunter-gatherer societies. They used the stone tools, they used other paraphernalia, the bow and the arrow, which is also a prehistoric, addition to this, to exploit natural resources. But one thing we should note, the only resource that was not transportable by prehistoric communities was water. So communities chose to live near water resources as opposed to food resources because it was difficult to transport water, number one. Secondly, water was so much essential because it was used for various functions, cooking, bathing, washing, and so forth. So there was that, understanding among prehistoric communities that they had to live in places which were near water points. Your second question was driving forces to the Central Rift. Of course, yes. The Central Rift is known, it has a rich environmental history, geologic history, formation of landforms, animal communities, and prehistoric people from the very beginning settled in places where there were wild animals because these animals formed the source of their diet. The animals were attracted to water points. And these water points, we find them in plenty in the central part of Kenya. In fact, we do have 3 lakes. At one time in history, we had only 1 lake conjoined the Pleistocene lake. So I agree with you, or perhaps I answer you that there were driving forces. That is very, very open to us. Graves at Iraq Hill. There's something I thought I didn't say, but I heard you. I'm not saying the graves are together, but the occupational floors, those settlement areas are very close to one of the Neolithic burial sites. And therefore, through some inductive and deductive reasoning, you do understand that there is no way a person can put an occupational floor or a campsite next to a gravesite And yet, there is no connection between that gravesite and the campsite. This could have been, a person buried there could have been a person who actually belonged to that occupation of road. That closeness does explain that. So those who are buried very far away, well, I think we are trying to borrow it from current affairs, that the people who are buried far away are those who are as well not, liked within the community. So that one, we'll talk about it later. Osage. Chronology, link between historic communities, current communities. Yes, I want to agree with you entirely. If you look at some of the features in the Central Rift Valley, one of the features is the Sirikwa hollows. And the Sirikwa hollows can be traced to the Westinigisu Plateau at a place called Sirikwa in Eldoret. And these hollows are assumed to have been related to a community that is close to the Karenjin speaking groups. If you go down Sotik region, even in my home area, within our home setting, when I was young, we had like 6 of them. So we didn't understand why we have these depressions. So from, oral information, oral history, our grandpas used to tell us, the people used to exist here are actually people from the Karenjin land. These are their features. And therefore they used to keep their animals here before, of course, they were driven away. About the contestation of who then is legitimately supposed to be in a given place. Elsewhere in Zambia, such archaeological researchers have been supported by government. If people want to support archaeological researchers to the effect that people want to establish actually who are the legitimate owners or occupants of a region, it can be done. And it is possible, but because of politics and all that, the outcome of that, people have moved, migrated and settled. I don't think that will be encouraged as such, because people have the freedom to live and set their businesses wherever they want to be. But I agree with you. Current communities, especially in those regions, are associated with some of these features we are talking about. And a good example is the Sirikwa hollows. Of course, figures. Yes, what I'm doing here is just for presentation. If you look at what I have in the computer, it is quite academic. I was doing this because of presentation, and I knew that I'd be given 30 minutes. So what I did was just to bring the figures here, then I'll explain from this point. But that's a very simple, task. Of course, I cannot want to publish a paper which looks like that. Yeah, that is just for illustration. So I agree with you. Dr. Mbongi, my chairman, thank you very much. Dr. Mbongi's questions are very tough because I think he uses either history and armed conflict. He goes around, then he comes to archaeology, but I attempt to answer. Archaeology is past, present, and space. How does, an archaeologist come? Well, how do we navigate through the past, present, and into the future? You see, the past defines our present time and charts the future for us. That's what historians know about. In fact, much of what we learn in archaeology today, when we go out to the field, we come with the data and we use that data and reference it with what is happening in our modern households. Before we knew, as archaeologists, that a sharp flake is used for cutting, we come back to our houses and look at the knife. If the knife is sharp on one edge and there is a stone tool which is sharp, then by intelligent guess, it must have been used for cutting purposes. So we use what we call analogical studies, comparison between what is happening presently and then making make us understand what happened in the past. So there is a way in which then we are infused between those two historical periods. Okay, environmental degradation and global warming. I don't know how to answer this, but if you read deeper into the history of the Central Rift, and what Professor Waume has also researched on so much and taught about the environmental change, there is something that I didn't screen here about, lake level changes. The lake level changes that you are seeing, especially in Naivasha today, started way before 1800. And this is as a result of what we call environmental change. So archaeologists are not only focusing on cultural materials. When we go into the field, we go with an array of expertise. We have geologists, we have biologists, we have environmentalists, and we work together. So if you study the geology of the Central Rift, then you will understand what changes have taken place over time. There are people who need to understand that as you drive to Nakuru, you see some whitish, substance along the road. The soils look like clay soil. That is evidence enough that at some point in history, the ancient times, the lake levels actually reached there, because those are lake deposits. Those are lake deposits. And therefore, I want to agree with Ken that we have had environmental change, environmental degradation, but not because of archaeological interventions, because of natural, natural forces, because of isostatic movements, geomorphic movements, and so forth. OMPES, wife sharing, the OMPES is that point at which most of the activities are concentrated at household level. But any other form of socialization beyond this and other activities can be done, especially in the outer, zone that we call the visitation zone. And when I used the wife's sharing sentiment here, I used it with caution. At some point, I didn't want to mention it, but I was so much excited of the same because Aidan mentions it actually in his study of the Aborigines. And therefore, I was trying to assume that if communities have the same aspirations, in the outer zone where there is socialization goes further into, I think the usage may have been bad, maybe marriage. Wife sharing, in this case, I want to put Hayden right, that it might be also a zone where you get your wife from. That could be the argument. Wife sharing, not in the sense that you give me your wife and I also give you mine. That one cannot happen. I think those were the questions, and I've exhausted them.
Thank you, Ben. Now we understand the meaning of wife sharing. Thank you. We'll have another round here in the audience, and we'll have the gentleman over there, and then Wafula. And any other question from the audience? Okay. Then we can go. Then we can go off-site. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ben Nyanchoga, for the sudden insightful presentation. Actually, it's very enlightening. You mentioned about the aspect of burial. Burial is actually a key feature of the Neolithic period. Remember, there's one of the scholars from Tanzania, Professor Chami. He actually excavated an area around Kaole, and he found out from 40 to 50,000 years ago, there was a burial in Kumbi Cave, and he actually excavated the artifacts in that area. So I think, what is the contribution of the key scholars like Professor Chami, our own Professor Ome, our own Motoro, and the other scholars like Wandiba and Onyango Abuche and the others? How have they contributed to enhancing this archaeological knowledge? Then the last one is, as you know, this is the 21st century. So as you know that we are moving from the ivory tower to the grassroots level. How can you, I think you can we need to move from the theory to actually the practicalities. How can we be innovative so that we can also involve the students in actually we come up with the innovation in this area so that we can marketize our innovations. Thank you.
My question is about conservation of the area around the site of Hyrax Hill. It's a long time since I was there, so I don't know what is on the ground. Maybe you want to tell us something about, because I now they see so many buildings, some modern developments around. What is happening? Just as information, as archaeologists, we need to know.
Okay, Ben.
Thank you very much. Let me answer the first question by our young attendee. First and foremost, I think we need to understand what Pastoral-Neolithic is. Pastoral-Neolithic was an economic practice that delved more into animal herding, domestication of animals with the limited cereal production. And I want to say this. So many scholars have been attracted towards the study of Pastoral-Neolithic communities on different aspects. I know, like Stan Ambrose is one of those scholars who has been coming on a yearly basis, investigating Middle Stone Age sites. Professor Wandiba has also been there for many years. We have had Karega Munene. But you see, what happens is this. Once one goes to the field, you are guided by a research problem, especially what you want to study. And many have written, on different aspects of Pastoral-Neolithic. And still, men are encouraged to do that because research is about eliciting more research. So they have made their contribution. And those of us who come later in life are only enriching that contribution, coming up with new insights and maybe delving into new areas. So they have made, key contributions. Some of them have been our teachers, supervisors, and even foremen, like Stan Ambrose. We worked together in the field for long. And that is perhaps how I came to know about the Central Rift. So the contribution they have made is insurmountable. How can we make it practical? This research was more, the outcome of this research was actually more of a practical endeavor. And we encourage students to join us when we go to the field. When I was a student of masters, I used to join Professor Stanley Ambrose in field, excavations. And therefore, we can practically engage in field archaeology and use that data to understand the theoretical conceptions that are there, and probably help us also to come up with new theories. So I think that is so much encouraged. Conservation. Mwalimu Wafula, Hyrax Hill is one of those sites that has suffered, encroachment, not a few years ago, but quite a number of years have passed. The last time I was there, the western part, northwestern part of that site, there are so many buildings. And originally we used to be told that Hyrax Hill's boundaries went beyond those buildings. But you see, the appreciation that is there for archaeology itself, there are people who don't understand what this means. The appreciation that is there for our culture is too low. And therefore, we are in a capitalist country where when people see what they perceive as idle land, they move in. And the powers to be that are there, they can influence, encroachment and so forth. So the place is not badly off. The features are intact. The Sirikwa horrors are intact. The Neolithic barrier is intact. The museum is intact. But some parts of it, I think, were lost to settlements many years back, not in the recent past. So it's in a fair state of conservation. I cannot say absolute, in a fair state of conservation. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, our audience. Let's listen to the online audience. I can see we have colleagues from many universities, the museum. JQuat is there, and we also have colleagues from other departments, psychology, and so on. So welcome, online audience, to fire your questions to Ben. I don't know whether there are some, we have questions that, yes. Margaret Gashehe. Okay, Jerry Mohoro, interesting perspectives. It's one of us. Dr. Margaret Gashehe, great presentation, Dr. Nyanchoga. What populations are we talking about? What would have been the farthest contacts with other communities depending on foreign materials tools found? Thank you. Any other question that someone would want to ask? You can raise your hand if you have a question. Our online audience. So we don't have questions from our online audience. We don't have any hand up. Probably they will ask as you respond to Dr. Margaret Gashehe's question. Probably just one thing about what Ken asked about environmental degradation. I think part of the desiccation of the Sahara has been attributed by some scholars to the Neolithic, the use of animals in that particular area, in addition to other environmental factors. Thank you. Let Ben respond to Dr. Gashehe.
Thank you very much, Daktari. The farthest distance that people would have traveled was dictated by, the value for resources, and of course, the cost and the energy. However, if you have to understand with certainty the distance traveled, especially in archaeological research, you have to look at the source of the materials. For example, if you are looking at obsidian, definitely you will know that there was a central place where this dark volcanic rock was harvested from. And therefore, the distance that people would have traveled was all the way to the resource places, to the central resource places. However, again, also culture changes. There's something we learned about culture change. Culture, together with technology, changes in many ways. It changes through diffusion, it changes through invention, it also changes through migration. So as people moved along, they must have carried their material additions wherever they went. And the communities they interacted with would have also, borrowed such materials or exchanged with such communities on the same materials or borrowed the ideas. And therefore, I think understanding how far given foreign materials will be understood from those two perspectives: the value of materials, the distance, the source, and of course, the aspect of culture change, especially through migration. I think that's the best way I can answer it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wish to appreciate all of you for finding time to come and attend our very dynamic lecture. And we hope that you will be with us next week for another dynamic talk. And I'll give the chair just 1 minute to close off. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Waome, our immediate former Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, who belongs to our department. Friends, mine is just a few things and a vote of thanks. Maybe without putting our high school teachers on the spot, but I'm sure you will agree with me that they made us believe that history is memorizing the names of people who have died and when they died, and archaeology is grave digging. Now, from what Dr. Nyanchoga has done this afternoon, this Nairobi afternoon, actually proves that that was far away from what these disciplines are. When we come down to the reality from the ivory tower, you realize that archaeology will play quite a big role in informing us one or two things about things like global warming,